IO9 presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Brought to you by Brilliance Audio. And here are your hosts, John Joseph Adams and David Barr Kirtley.
Hi, this is Dave.
And this is John.
And welcome to episode 22 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. So this is the first episode that we're producing in partnership with IO9 and Brilliance Audio. And we'd really like to thank Annalee Newitz of IO9 and John Grace of Brilliance Audio for supporting the show and allowing us to keep doing this.
Since we're new here at IO9, I thought we should introduce ourselves. So I'm John Joseph Adams. I'm the editor of several anthologies, such as Wastelands and The Living Dead. I'm also the editor of the online science fiction magazine Lightspeed, which is at lightspeedmagazine.com. And my most recent books are The Living Dead 2, which just came out, and The Way of the Wizard, which comes out in November.
And I'm David Barr Kirtley. I'm the author of a few dozen short stories that have appeared in magazines such as Realms of Fantasy, Weird Tales, Lightspeed, and Intergalactic Medicine Show, and in books such as New Voices in Science Fiction, Fantasy the Best of the Year, and The Dragon Done It. And my two newest stories appear in John's anthologies The Living Dead 2 and The Way of the Wizard. If you're just joining us here at Geek's Guide to the Galaxy, we just want to let you know that we produced 21 episodes earlier this year for Tor.com, and those are all still online. You can go to Tor.com and click on podcasts and check all those out. We've interviewed lots of different interesting people: Paolo Bacigalupi, Holly Black, Naomi Novik, Sherry Priest, Jonathan Colton, and we talked about Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and zombies and real-life war robots and all sorts of fun stuff like that. And on the show today, we'll be interviewing George R.R. Martin and talking about his work. And I know a lot of people are probably just tuning into this because they want to hear the George R.R. Martin interview. And we have a bunch of listeners already who I know have been waiting to listen to this interview for a long time. So we're going to get right to that. This is an interview that we recorded back in May, and we're really happy to be able to bring it to you finally. If you haven't read George R. R. Martin's Song of Ice and Fire series, you should definitely do that. It's just one of the best book series out there right now. They're sort of epic fantasy and kind of noteworthy for having an emphasis on courtly intrigue and politics and a gritty, unromanticized view of life in a medieval society and morally ambiguous characters and sparing use of magic. You know, it's not like Harry Potter where everyone's got a magic everything. You know, when Song of Ice and Fire, the magic just comes in at moments of high drama. And also, the series, there's a real willingness to have bad things, shockingly bad things, happen to major characters. And the first book in the series is called Game of Thrones, and it's currently being adapted into a series by HBO.
Yeah, what did HBO describe it as? Like The Lord of the Rings meets The Sopranos or something?
Yeah.
So that's kind of a good shorthand way of letting you know what it's like.
Yeah, so everybody watch that, because we're really hoping it does well, because we want to see more stuff like that on TV.
Also, that's a good reason to read the books now. You know, get it on the ground floor before your visions of the characters are all changed by what you see on on television. So get the mental picture first, and read the books first, and then see the adaptation later.
And we should note that we set up this interview with George, and he agreed to talk to us for 45 minutes, and asked if we could cover not just Song of Ice and Fire and the HBO adaptation. He says he has all these other projects that he wanted to talk about as well. And so we started drawing up questions, and actually figured we had enough questions to fill up the whole interview with that. So we figured we would just ask him about all the other stuff he's got going on, and then John and I would talk about Song of Ice and Fire after the interview, because I follow all that news closely enough that I feel like I know everything that George is prepared to make public about the series, and we could talk about all that stuff.
You probably could have told him a few things he didn't even know.
But then, as you'll hear, we actually got to the end of our interview, and George said, hey, we could keep going. We could talk about some Ice and Fire stuff. So we did end up with the chance to ask him a couple questions about that as well. So we're really grateful to George for joining us on the show and answering so many questions for us. And we really hope you enjoyed the interview, which we'll get to right after this word from our sponsor.
New from Brilliance Audio, Book 1 of the Inheritance Trilogy, The 100,000 Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin. Gods and mortals, power and love, death and revenge. She will inherit them all. Yena Dar is an outcast from the barbarian north, but when her mother dies under mysterious circumstances, she is summoned to the majestic city of Sky. There, to her shock, Yena is named an heiress to the king. But the throne of the 100,000 Kingdoms is not easily won, and Yena is thrust into a vicious power struggle with cousins she never knew she had. As she fights for her life, she draws ever closer to the secrets of her mother's death and her family's bloody history. Nina will learn how perilous it can be when love and hate, and gods and mortals, are bound inseparably together. The 100,000 Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin. Narrated by Cassandra Freeman. Available now from Brilliance Audio and wherever audiobooks are sold.
Well, let's travel back in time to May and get George R. R. Martin on the phone.
Hello there.
Hi, this is Dave and John from Geek's Guide to the Galaxy.
Hi there. How you doing? This is George.
So you're an avowed comic book fan, and several of your works are currently being adapted into graphic novel format, including Fever Dream and Doorways. Could you tell us a little bit about those projects?
Yeah, I did. I am a comic book fan. I started too many years ago as a kid, writing for comic fanzines and having letters published in the Marvel comics of the '60s, long before I started making my professional sales. So I've always loved comic books and superheroes. In the last few years, I've had a number of comic publishers approach me wanting to do some sort of project with me. Of course, while I would love to do actually write something original for comic books, I really don't have the time to do that. There's a limited number of hours in a day, and I can only juggle so many balls at one time. So I can't do anything original. So what I do suggest then is the comic adaptation of some of the things I've done. Fever Dream is a historical horror novel that I originally wrote back in the early '80s, and that is currently being done by Avatar Comics. It was adapted for comics from my novel by my good friend Daniel Abraham, who did a wonderful job. It's a 10-issue miniseries. First issue just came out last month at the Chicago Comic Expo, C2E2, and I came in for that and did a premiere event there to help launch the book. So it'll run 10 monthly issues, and then it'll be collected into a graphic novel. The art is by the Spanish artist Rafael Lopez. So that's one. And then the other one that you asked me about, Doorways. Doorways was one of the pilots I did during my time in television. It was perhaps the one that got along furthest. It was an alternate world series, a pilot for an alternate world series that I wrote originally for ABC while I was at Columbia Pictures, and they liked it, and they gave us a green light, and we shot the pilot, starring George Newbern and a wonderful actress from France named Amla Gurnick, and some other great people, Rob Knepper, Tisha Putman, Hoyt Axton. So we had a terrific pilot, I thought, but unfortunately ABC did not pick it up, and we were not able to place it elsewhere. But I've always loved the characters and the stories. At one point, when it did look like we were going to pick it up, ABC actually ordered 6 backup scripts. So I spent about half a year writing one of those and supervising the other 5 that were written by other people. So there's a considerable backlog of Doors stories that are available. So I'm launching that one with a comic company called IDW, and that's in a much earlier stage of development. We're still at the conceptual stage and working things out, and they'll probably be working directly from my script without the need for an adaptation, since the screenplay teleplay form and the comic script form are, pretty close to each other. It's something an artist can work with, and we hope to make that. We're going to do the pilot initially, adapt the pilot episode to the comics form. But if that's successful, it proves to be a popular comic. That could be an ongoing thing where we could adapt the later backup scripts and follow the adventures of characters at least that far. And after that, as if we were a TV series, perhaps commission some new material, the further adventures of Tom and Kat, the 2 lead characters there.
Okay, so you and Gardner Dozois have been editing some anthologies lately, one of which was Songs of the Dying Earth, Jack Vance tribute anthology.
There's another anthology Gardner and I are doing called Warriors. You may be familiar with. Warriors just came out in March. And Warriors is a big cross-genre anthology about warriors, obviously, but it's not just a science fiction or fantasy anthology. We got a wide variety of writers from many different genres. We wanted to not restrict ourselves to one genre. So there are mystery stories and romance stories and mainstream stories in there. But when we were putting together Warriors, one of the first people I approached was Jack Vance through his agent. who is also one of my agents, because I love Jack's work, and the chance of having something new for Jack for this big anthology would have been a dream of mine. But unfortunately, Jack is in his 90s, and he's blind, and he's not really writing much anymore. He was working on his memoirs then, which are subsequently come out, but we were told that he probably would not be doing any more fiction. And that made me very sad because, as I said, Vance is a tremendous influence on me, a tremendous writer, one of my favorite science fiction and fantasy writers of all time. And the idea that there would be no more of his wonderful stories saddened me. And then I got the idea, well, look, maybe he would be willing to have other people write some stories in some of his universes, particularly The Dying Earth, which was one of his first creations. The original Dying Earth book came out in the early 50s, and has been one of the most seminal universes, I think, in the entire history of fantasy. It ranks up there with the Hyborian Age and Middle Earth as a setting for great fantasy. So we approached Jack through his agents about doing this, and he was willing. So we worked out the terms of that, and then we went ahead and did this tribute anthology to Jack. He gave us permission to use his world and his characters, and we solicited writers who we thought had mentioned at some point being Vance fans, or whose work, to our minds, showed evidence that they were Vance fans. And indeed, boy, it was the easiest anthology to fill up that I've ever worked on, because people were just so eager to be a part of it once they heard of it. People were saying, well, I'd write for this anthology for free. I'd crawl over broken glass to be part of this anthology. You can't possibly keep me out of it. We even got stories from about 4 or 5 people who we did not invite, but who heard about it from some other way, and wrote stories entirely on spec and sent them to us. It's a terrific book, and we had everybody write an afterword about how they first discovered Jack Vance and the influence he had on his own work. And Jack himself contributed a short preface to the book, and Dean Koontz wrote an appreciation. So we got some great people in there. That's an anthology I'm very pleased with.
Another of your recent books you put together is called Songs of Love and Death. It comes out in November. What was the idea behind that one?
Well, I talked a little about Warriors, which came out in March. Warriors, as I said, was a cross-genre anthology. I read in a number of different genres, and I talk in the introduction to Warriors about how when I was a kid in Bayonne, New Jersey, there were no bookstores in Bayonne. So when I started reading books as opposed to comic books, I bought them all off paperbacks off a wire spinner rack that was right next to the comic books in my local candy store. And in that spinner rack, there were no sections. All the books were jumbled together, usually only 1 or 2 copies of each. So if you wanted to find out, looking for science fiction, you had to kind of look through every pocket and not just look at the book in front, but look at the book behind, which could be different. And, I got very practiced at looking through the whole thing. And I was mostly a science fiction fantasy fan even then, but I would come across some other interesting books. I would come across a mystery novel that looked sort of interesting, and I might take that home. I would come across a classic of literature, Tale of Two Cities, and I would say, I read the classics comic book of this. Let's try the real book, and I would pick that up. So dealing with the spinner rack as I did sort of accustomed me to reading fairly widely in a variety of genres, or at least being familiar with them enough to pick them up and look at the blurbs. I think we've lost that in today's book-selling environment, because most people buy their books from bookstores. Everything is completely segregated. If you're a fan of science fiction, you go into your bookstore, you go to the science fiction section. You don't even look at what else is in the other sections. The mystery fans are similar, going to the mystery section. Gardner and I wanted to break that down a little, because we both read in a variety of genres, and we know there's many, many good writers out there that I think people would enjoy if they would only discover them. So we put together this Warriors anthology about drawing writers from all different genres. That was the first of these cross-genre books we've done, but it was successful enough, and we had enough fun doing it, that we decided to do more cross-genre anthologies. And Songs of Love and Death is one of those, and that one we deliberately set out to cross science fiction and fantasy on one hand with romance on the other. Both very popular genres. You guys presumably are coming from the science fiction and fantasy side of the equation with your Geek show. So you may not be aware that over in the romance section, there's a growing subgenres of science fiction romance and fantasy romance, time travel romance. These are very popular genres that romance fans are reading about. And so they're sort of reading science fiction and fantasy without even realize that they're reading science fiction and fantasy. And the science fiction and fantasy fans are not aware of those writers. Similarly, love stories. I mean, back in the 70s when I broke in, I was widely considered a very romantic writer because a lot of my stories were about lost loves among the stars and things like that, including my first Hugo winner, Song for Laia. So it seemed like a natural for us. It was actually Gardner's idea. Our initial title was Star-Crossed Lovers, and we recruited from both the science fiction and fantasy communities and from the romance community, and assembled this book that we hope will cross over and appeal to fans from both sides of the fence, and maybe help people discover some new writers that they would like to read more of. Okay,
so Warriors includes your Duncan Egg novella, The Mystery Knight. Do you have plans to write any other shorter works? One of our listeners specifically wants to know if there will be any more Haviland tough stories.
I have more tough stories I would like to tell, yeah. It's just a question of when. You know, there's only one of me, unfortunately, and there's only so many projects I can do at one time. But I would love to do more tough stories. I have an idea for a tough novel. I have an idea for a bunch of other stories. I'd like to revisit the character. But I also have a sequel to Fever Dream that I want to write someday. I have some new books that I want to write. And before I can do any of that, I need to finish Song of Ice and Fire, which, of course, I'm still working on the 5th book, and then there's a 6th and the 7th book beyond that. Each of these books is taking me years to complete. So I don't know. Will I ever get back to tough? Maybe. You know, it depends on how long I live and how long I can continue to be productive. I make no predictions on any of these scores.
Other recent work you have out are a couple new volumes in the long-running Wild Cards Shared World superhero anthology series. What's the current state of Wild Cards, and what can we look forward to in the future?
Well, actually, I was just working on the latest Wild Card book as you rang. Volume 21, which is, although we don't use the numbers anymore, but it's the 21st volume in the series. It's called Fort Freak. It's sort of a return to Jokertown, which was a setting for many of the early Wildcard books, Jokertown in New York City, down around the Bowery, but it hasn't been featured so much in the later books. But we're coming back to it now, and it's kind of police work in the Wildcards universe. What it's like for the 5th Precinct, which is right in the middle of Jokertown, and therefore is given the name Fort Freak. And we're telling some stories of that. The first Wildcard book, Wildcards 1, which originally came out in 1987, is going to be reissued by Tor in hardcover in November with 3 brand new stories in it that were not included in the first edition. So we got some extra material there, and of course the classic things. So we hope to proceed on 2 fronts with Wildcards until one front have the old books reissued. Some of them have been out of print for a long time. There's a great demand for them. I mean, you can look up a few of them have become extremely valuable books on Abe and from used bookstores and rare book dealers simply because of the demand for them. At the same time, we're reissuing the old books. We want to continue to do new books. We have some great new writers, some terrific new characters, so we're working on that. And there's also Wildcard Comics. You know, we've had a Wildcard comic written by Daniel Abraham called The Hard Call. It came out from the Dabble Brothers. DB Pro ran into some publication delays there, but DB Pro has now been taken over by Dynamite, and they have smoothed out all the problems. So the last issue of that comic series will be coming out pretty soon, and then after that, it'll be collected into a graphic novel, and we're talking about another Wildcard series.
So there have been a lot of other sort of shared world anthology series over the years, but none really as successful as Wildcards. What advice do you have to anyone else attempting to launch a shared world series? And do you think there should be more of those? Because really, the Wildcard's the only one currently going.
Yeah, they were big rage back in the 80s. Thieves World was the one that led the way, and Thieves World was enormously successful for a time. I mean, at its peak, they were probably doing better than anybody. But at a certain point, they they petered off, and then there were many others. There was Leovac, Ithkar, those were Merovingian Knights. Those were all fantasy shared worlds like Thieves World. There was War World, Heroes in Hell. There was a horror shared world called Greystone Bay. For a while, like everybody had their shared worlds. Now you don't see that anymore. Pretty much, we are the only one that's survived the intervening 20 years. I actually think the shared world is a very interesting form. It's a bunch of writers working together. In some ways, it's like working on a TV show, if you can assemble a good staff. But it's very demanding. I mean, you need editing a Wildcards book is 10 times more work than editing something like Warriors or the Vance anthology, because all the stories have to fit together. So you not only have to edit the stories for quality, but you have to edit the stories for continuity, and to make all of the parts assemble into a greater whole. So it's a demanding task for an editor, and it takes a certain kind of writer too. Some writers are loners, and they like being loners. That doesn't work in a shared world. You really need to be team players, writers who enjoy working with each other, writers who don't mind rewriting. There's always a lot of rewriting involved to make the stories fit together. But I'd love to see more good shared worlds. I enjoyed the form. You got to pick your personnel very carefully, though, and you have to have a good, strong premise, which I think Wildcard does have. And you got to have a set of operating rules. Wildcard's coming along like the fourth or fifth shared world after some of the others had come out. We were able to learn from the experiences of the others, particularly from Thieves World, where Robert Aspirin and Lynn Abbey, the editors of that, shared with me many of their trials and tribulations. And we were able to set up operating rules that I think have worked very, very successfully for us and avoid some of the problems that Thieves World ran into.
Okay, so Wildcards originally grew out of a role-playing game. Do you still belong to a gaming group, and if so, what games have you been playing lately?
I do belong to a gaming group, but unfortunately, I haven't played any much in the last year, so our group seems to have been dissipating a little. Most recently, we were playing a space game, and before that, a game set in ancient Rome, which was like a straight historical game. We were all playing, rising Roman politicians and soldiers at the end of the late Republic, hobnobbing with Julius Caesar and Pompey and Crassus and people like that.
So in a recent blog post, you wrote that most readers would probably be shocked to learn how many of their favorite authors have no health insurance whatsoever. What's it like trying to obtain health insurance as a full-time fiction writer, and what do you think could be done to improve the situation?
Well, I mean, ideally, what America needs is a single-payer health plan like they have in Canada or Australia or New Zealand. While I think that the recent health act that President Obama passed is a wonderful step in the right direction, I wish that he had gone a lot further and had managed to have the political support to get through a true single-payer plan. But yes, I've been lucky because I do very well. I especially with Ice and Fire, and before that I worked in Hollywood. So while I worked in Hollywood for that decade, I had a health plan through the Writers Guild, which is an excellent plan. And then when I stopped working in Hollywood, I was able to COBRA for a number of years. So I kept my coverage through that. And then, thankfully, New Mexico has a state law. We have something called the New Mexico Health Insurance Alliance, which guarantees acceptance if you're coming off of COBRA. But it's a little tricky. I mean, if I had delayed a month when my COBRA was about to expire, if I had delayed a month so my COBRA actually ended, then I would not have been able to get health insurance because that automatic guarantee under state law would have not kicked in. And of course, as I said, I know a lot of writers who are not as lucky as me, who haven't had Hollywood, and you can only get COBRA if you're coming off an employer health thing. And people have had pre-existing conditions, people who have, once upon a time we were all in our 20s and we were all healthy and we didn't need health insurance. And when you're a young writer, as I was, as many of my friends were back in the 70s and the 80s, maybe you're not making much money, but you don't want to get a day job. You're trying to make it as a full-time writer, and you're young and healthy. Health insurance seems like a luxury, so you don't get it. And then the years pass, and suddenly you're not as healthy as you were, and suddenly it's more expensive because now you're older, And if you wait too long and actually get sick, then you're really screwed because now you have a pre-existing condition and they won't take you. But it's terrible. I mean, right now the situation in science fiction and fantasy is not good because a lot of writers of my generation, the baby boomers, are now getting to close to retirement age, and they're getting older, they're getting sicker, and as I said in that post, a lot of people would be surprised at how few of them have health insurance or who have good health insurance. They may have some kind of ridiculous plan, but it doesn't cover it. Insurance companies will screw you if they all can. We did get SFWA, the Science Fiction Writers of America, back in the 90s, did manage to get health insurance through Aetna for all of its members. It was, it was not required, but it was open to all civil members. You could get this health insurance. It wasn't a great plan, but it was better than nothing. And unfortunately, SFWA has like 1,400 members. I think like 200 members signed up for the health insurance because the other 1,200 were, I don't know, they had a better plan through their day job. The ones who had day jobs, some of them had plans to their husband or wife, were covered by families. Some of them, I guess, were young and healthy and figured they didn't need it. But for the 200 who had the Aetna plan, it was a godsend. It was very good. But then we only were able to offer it for like 3 years, and then Aetna decided that they would just drop us all, and they did. They couldn't drop us in New York State because New York State had laws that once an insurance company insured people, they had to continue to insure them as long as the premiums continued to be paid. So the SFWA members who were in New York State were still covered, but in the other 49 states, we all got just dropped, even though we had paid our premiums on time. And no other insurance company was willing to step forward and make a deal with SFWA. We do, in SFWA, have a medical emergency plan where we raise money through auctions of donated items at conventions. And we have enough money in that fund now that if a member has a medical emergency, we can give them a $10,000 interest-free loan. But number one, it's a loan. And number two, it's limited to $10,000, even with the money we save. And as you know, if you get a serious illness, you can go through $10,000 in a week. In fact, if you have to have some certain kind of surgery, that's $10,000 right there. Boom, is gone. So it's not really enough. But hopefully the country is finally moving in a direction that this won't be the crisis this is, and we'll have the kind of security that people in Australia and New Zealand and England and France and most of the first world have.
You've taught before at the Odyssey Writers Workshop and will be teaching this summer at Clarion. What's your approach when it comes to teaching writing, and did you have any writing mentors yourself?
I never went to Clarion or any similar group as a writer myself, although I was aware of them. But I formed my own workshop back when I was living in Chicago, the Windy City Writers Workshop, which was based on the Milford method, Clarion, which is Clarion too. Clarion grew out of Milford, Damon Knight's famous group, and uses the same method where you intensive critique of stories under discussion. And that's basically what we do at Clarion or in Odyssey is the writers submit stories and you criticize them, and not only do you get individual notes on the story, but I think some larger themes inevitably emerge from the criticism. So that's pretty much what I'll be doing at Clarion. I do have occasional lectures on specific topics that I may throw in if the time permits, but it's very much an active workshop. I mean, I also have taught at other workshops over the years that are what I would call more passive workshops, where you have a series of lecturers come in and you have 100 students are sitting in a room and you give them a lecture about characterization or something. And that may have its uses, but it's not nearly as useful as, to my mind, as the Clarion or approach, where you only have a small group of like 15 to 20 people, and you're dealing with their actual work, and they're getting intensive criticism of that work. In case of Clarion, it's 6 weeks, and they get 6 different teachers, so you also get a variety of viewpoints in there, and the teachers may not even necessarily agree with each other, but that's good too. You get exposed to different philosophies about writing and so forth.
You mentioned that Wildcards #1 is being re-released. I heard you tell a story once about that where you were saying that the only time you ever saw Roger Zelazny lose his temper was in connection with that book. Could you talk about that?
Oh, yeah, sure. As you said, Wildcards came out of a role-playing game. So when we first decided to adapt it, I went outside. The core group who began Wildcards were the people who've been in the game. Myself, Melinda Snodgrass, John Joseph Miller, Dick Milan, Walter John Williams. But we needed more writers, so we went outside of that group and I recruited people I knew who were comics fans, including Roger Zelazny and Howard Waldrop. And Howard, I love Howard. He's my oldest friend. He's one of the most brilliant short story writers in the field. But Howard is a stubborn coot, and it's impossible to get him to do anything he doesn't want to do, and he does things in his own way. And Howard insisted that he would do a story for us, but his story had to be set in 1946. And in particular, it had to be set on September 15th, 1946. That was the day his story took place, the climax of his story, anyway. We had initially planned to begin Wildcard in 1986, which was when we were writing the book. It would begin in the present. But if we wanted Howard in the book, we had to set it in 1946. It was actually good that Howard insisted that he do that because it really made the first book special. I think we were able to present 40 years of history because we didn't want to stay in 1946. So, of course, we wanted to get up. So the first book, Wildcards 1, covers from 1946, Howard's story, which opens the book, all the way up into 1986, which was the present at the time that we were writing that book. The thing you have to remember about 1946 was that September 15th, 1946 is, in addition to the day that the wild card is released on Earth, and as dramatized in the book, it also happens to be Howard Waldrop's date of birth. That was the day on which Howard was born. So Howard is writing his story. We're all writing his stories, and Roger, who's part of it, created this character Croyd, who was like in junior high when Wildcard Day happens, and he was going to set his story in 1946, roughly through 1950, but it began in 46, and he wanted Croyd at school and looking up and seeing Howard's Jetboy character fighting in the sky, and then walking home as the Wildcard is released and the world changes around him. So he asked Howard, the one thing he needed from Howard, he said, what day of the week is September 15th, 1946? Because it's crucial that it be a school day. And Howard said, it's a Tuesday. So Roger writes his whole story based on the fact that his character is walking home from school, and it's a Tuesday. And his story is finished, Howard's story is finished, and we were having some sort of conference or something at my house, and we had like Howard on the speakerphone or something like that. And Roger was sitting in my living room smoking his pipe, and I don't even remember how it came out, but suddenly it actually comes out that September 15th, 1946 is a Sunday. And as to what time, as I say, I saw Roger lose it. He just said, oh, fuck, and he took his pipe out and he threw it across the room and bounced it off the wall here. And Howard was sort of, it's a Sunday? I was always told I was born on a Tuesday. That's what my mother always said. So he never bothered to look it up. So we got that inconsistency there in Wildcard, which at that point it was too late to change without essentially trashing Roger's entire story, which we weren't about to do. So we just gritted our teeth and hoped that no one would notice, which indeed, as far as I know, no one has, except when I tell this damn story.
These days, when you do a book signing, hundreds of people are likely to show up, but it wasn't always that way. Could you talk about the time you did a signing at the same time as Clifford the Big Red Dog?
Sure. That was one of my more memorable disastrous signings. That was on the book tour for Game of Thrones, the first book in the series. The hardcover just come out. Of course, it was my first novel in some time, and because I've been working in Hollywood for most of the last 10 years, and the series wasn't yet huge, so I was not getting large turnouts at most of my signings. Turnouts ranged from, I don't know, a couple dozen, I suppose, at the biggest, to hardly anybody at all at the smallest. And that was a case. I was touring Texas. They had me in Houston and Austin and Dallas, and it was I believe it was at the Dallas stop. And we arrived at the bookstore. It was one of the chain bookstores, I recall. And the parking lot was full, and there were all these people getting out of their cars and going in. And I thought, well, this This is good. It looks like this one signing will be a large signing at least. Of course, I discovered when I got in there that there were two signings. I was signing in the front of the store, and in the back of the store, as you have said, Clifford the big red dog was signing. And so I had like 3 people, and Clifford had like hundreds. The way Clifford the Big Red Dog tours, I discovered by asking, since I had a lot of time to converse with the store manager, was they have this moth-eaten, sweat-stained Clifford costume that they ship from store to store. And it's like whoever is the junior employee at the bookstore has to put it on and pretend to be Clifford and woof at the children as they come by. And they have one of his hands is like a rubbery thing, and he has a huge red ink pad that he steps in. So his signature is a paw print, a red ink paw print on the book. And he was busily slapping the books while I signed my signature a few times. So it was a humbling experience. It's writers need things like that, I'm sure, to keep it modest, keep us modest. Otherwise, our ego might get out of control.
Okay, so Song of Ice and Fire has also been adapted into various games, a board game, a collectible card game, role-playing game, and an upcoming computer game. How involved are you in the development of those games, and have you had a chance to actually play any of them?
I've played some of them. I played the board game, most notably. I haven't played the card game. The rules are very complicated. I don't have the time. But, whenever I make a license deal like that, I get certain rights of approval, because I want anything coming out with my name on it or with the Ice and Fire name on it to have a certain standard of quality and to be true to the books. But my approvals are limited to the artwork, where I consult with what artists to hire and review particular artworks. And also the text, the stuff that says about the world and the characters. I review that for continuity. I don't look at any of the gaming stuff. I'm not enough into the gaming universe to give expert opinions about the game mechanics or the rules or all that. So I just trust that my licensees know what they are doing in that regard.
Is there any news related to any of those games? New stuff coming out, or can you tell us anything about the computer game or anything like that?
The computer game is in development, but I can't tell you any more about it. I've seen some conceptual art that I really like. Once again, although I reviewed some of the textual matters, I'm leaving all the game mechanics and stuff to the folks at Cyanide, who are the French company that has licensed the rights.
Oh, so other than games, one of your hobbies is collecting miniatures. Does that help inspire your writing at all? And are there any particular characters or scenes that you dreamed up as a result of working with your collection?
No, not really. I enjoy collecting the miniatures. I've been doing it for, like 15 years now. I have a pretty substantial collection, but it's just a hobby. They're beautiful. I enjoy doing that. Like someone else might collect stamps and all that, but I don't think it really particularly affects the books. Dark Sword Miniatures, which is doing the licenses of the based on Ice and Fire characters, I do work with them closely on those miniatures and what they will look like, and I give them notes on the first sculpts, and they make changes and so forth. And that's a lot of fun because, it combines a hobby and a passion of mine with the work itself.
Okay, so J.R.R. Tolkien rewrote sections of The Hobbit to make it more consistent with The Lord of the Rings. Is there anything in your earlier books that you wish you could go back and change in light of later developments, and do you think you might ever do something like that?
There are probably things that I would like to go back and change, and by the time I finish the series, there might be more. I don't know that I would ever do anything like that to the extent that I'm not sure how much Tolkien actually did that, but I know Stephen King has done that with the Dark Tower series. He's done some fairly substantial revisions to the earlier books in light of things that happened in the later books. Maybe. There's actually one thing under consideration right now. I can't say too much about it, but that might impact. It's very minor, though. It would be changing a character's name, changing the name of a minor character who for the television series. And if we go ahead and change that name, I might go back in the books and change his name in the books as well. So the later editions of the book, the minor character would have a different name, but it's still up in the air whether we'll actually do that or not. So that's really all I can say about it right now.
So you're known for having fans who are very emotionally invested in your work. What are some of the more noteworthy examples you've encountered of fan activity connected to your writing?
The internet has really changed a lot of things about fandom, where people have web pages and blogs now where they used to publish fanzines, and fan groups and things are a lot more common. There have been, at this point, I think dozens of fan websites devoted to my Ice and Fire series, and at least one or two devoted to my Wildcard series. And some of those are still going strong. Others have folded and gone and are now just fading memories. Others are, still up there on the web but haven't been updated in 5 years, so they're kind of like ghost towns. But the ones that are thriving are still thriving, and they're getting hundreds of hits a day, and if not thousands, and people are debating every aspect of the work and discussing it, and that's all very very gratifying. I get artwork that is sent to me by fans, things that they put up on DeviantArt and other web art sharing websites like that. Of course, at conventions, there's the Brotherhood Without Banners, which is a sort of semi-formal fan group that grew out of some of the fans who would meet at conventions and start to throw parties, and they're terrific. They throw parties every year at Worldcon, usually the best party at a convention, and they have raffles and things like that to pay for the parties, and also to bring over their members from other countries and places to attend who could not otherwise afford to attend. They've raised money for charity, and they volunteer to work at the conventions, so I have great fans by and large.
You also have people naming kids after your characters, and like I saw a photo of you standing on a stage with a group of women dressed up as Melisandre and stuff like that.
Yes, those were Spanish fans. The bunch of Melisandres and Night's Watch. There's a Spanish fan group called Ashai, who are enormously active and do all sorts of things like that. They're a great bunch. The Italian fans are also amazing. I visited them last time I was in Italy, so it's a kind of a worldwide phenomenon, which is very gratifying to me. I'll look forward this year, of course, to Worldcons in Australia. So I'll be going down there to Australia and to New Zealand and meeting some of my fans from those areas for the first time. That should be fun.
Speaking of naming, I kind of want to change my name to Jet Boy, just because it's much cooler than John.
Well, that's a pretty cool name, yeah.
So what are some of your other upcoming appearances, and is there anything else in the works that you'd like people to know about?
God, we've covered a lot of things. I have more anthologies coming out. As I said, I'm working on Wildcards, and of course I'm working on Dance with Dragons. And the big thing coming down the pike is the HBO series, which starts filming in July. This is, of course, the HBO series based on Game of Thrones, and stars Sean Bean as Ned Stark, and Lena Headey as Cersei Lannister, Peter Dinklage as Tyrion Lannister, Nikolai Coster-Waldau as Jaime Lannister, etc., and like a cast of thousands, many of whom will die. But we filmed the pilot in Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Morocco last year, and HBO has given us the green light for a 10-episode first season, and we will start filming again in July. Probably come on next March, next April, somewhere thereabouts. And if the series is successful, well, of course, then more seasons will be done after that. The plan is to do each book as one season.
Okay, well, I think we're that does it for our questions, and we're at about 45 minutes. So.
Okay. Well, if you do want to add a few questions about Ice and Fire, I'm willing. I mean, you've covered all my other stuff, so we can certainly ask about that too.
Okay, I had a couple questions. Like, who's Jon Snow's mother, and who's Cold Hands, and
I think I'll avoid those questions. Jet Boy is Jon Snow. Or a zombie. Zombies, and John, your zombie book must have kicked off something. Every time I turn around, there's more zombie stuff coming out these days.
Yeah, everybody and their mother's doing a zombie book now.
That's damn right. Yeah, it's amazing. I have my zombie raising wildcard character. I obviously have to write more about her.
Yeah.
Cash in on this whole zombie thing that's going on.
Well, Rand from the message board wanted to know sort of what had been some of the biggest surprises that had developed in the series, as you wrote it.
I don't know if anything really surprised me. nothing leaps to mind offhand. I kind of knew the broad outlines of where I was going, before I got there. I mean, people always ask me to what extent the series is planned ahead of time, and my usual answer there is to compare it to a journey. Like if I'm in New York and I'm going to drive to Los Angeles, I look at a map and I know I'm going to leave New York and I'm going to take this road and I'm going to go through Chicago and then I'm going to head down along the old Route 66 or something and I'll go through the Southwest, et cetera, and eventually I'll get to Los Angeles. So I know the principal places I'm going to go through and the roads I'm going to take. But what I don't know is the details of what's along the way. Where will I stop the first night to sleep? Where will I stop the second night? Where will the road be closed and I'll have to take a detour? Where will I pick up a hitchhiker? That sort of stuff you discover along the journey. And it's the same way with writing. I know the principal events. I know the roads I'm going to take to get there. But I do discover things along the way, things that come out in the actual writing.
On your blog, you talked a lot about the untying the Myronese knot. Can you say anything about what made you have to keep rewriting those sections?
I'm still trying to unwrite it, to untie it. It's problematical. Well, Marine, of course, refers to the city on Slaver's Bay where Daenerys Targaryen is left at the end of Storm of Swords. And she's the queen of that city, and she's trying to rule that city and to bring peace to the region. And she's faced with various challenges, both internal and external and personal. And there are various events that occur. Meanwhile, I have a number of other characters, viewpoint characters, and also secondary characters, who are making their way to her and are turning up in Marine at various points. So the chronology is kind of tricky because some of them left at the end of Storm of Swords, and some of them left at various different points during the course of Feast for Crows, which does not actually precede Dance with Dragons, but occurs simultaneously with Dance with Dragons. So I have to figure out that chronology and when will they get there, when everybody will get there, and then with the events that are actually happening in Marine, with the war and the other things that are going on, and certain events that I could talk about that wouldn't make any sense to you or your readers because you haven't read about them yet. Well, does that happen before character X gets there, but after character Y gets there? And if so, character X would have a role in that, or character X would see part of that as a viewpoint. So I read it that way, and I said, well, no, maybe character Y should get there first, or maybe this would partly be from the viewpoint of character Z. He could have a different, and it's just a tangle of events and arrivals and viewpoints that are all coming together at one point. And I keep feeling that somewhere here there's an optimal answer where everything will fall into place, and I'll find the most effective way of telling all of this, intercutting between these viewpoints and putting things together so that the events occur in the best possible thing. But if one event occurs before another event, it changes the events that follow. If someone is there as opposed to not being there, it changes what it is. So as I change my mind about this, I keep rewriting it too and trying to get to the best possible unraveling of this knot. And I don't think I'm there yet, but I'm worrying at it, and I think I'm making some progress.
See, Dance with Dragons is planned to be sort of a parallel novel to Feast for Crows, and you had said, depending on how things went, you might stick in some of the characters from Feast for Crows at the end. Do you have any sort of more sense of how that might go?
Well, that still is my intent. In fact, I have some of those chapters already written, so there will be a chunk of Dance. The two books will start out in parallel, but then Dance will continue on chronologically for a period after Feast ended, which will allow me to bring back some of the characters from Feast for at least a chapter or two toward the end. But the joker in the deck there is the question of the ultimate length of Dance. As you know, there's a limit to how long a book can be. That was one of the reasons I split the book, because I was running up against that, and unfortunately, I may be running up against it again. I don't know. I have to. If Dance comes in below the length of Storm of Swords, I think I should be okay. If Dance winds up going longer than Storm of Swords, then I'm going to have to remove some of the material that I've already written for Dance, because Storm of Swords was on the borderline of how long a book one can publish without it actually falling apart in its mind. In which case, those chapters would be shifted over to the next book. But I don't know. I'll have a better sense of all of that when I'm actually finished with this last piece of it.
season 1 of the HBO series is planned to cover the events of Game of Thrones.
Right.
Have you and the team thought ahead about how the rest of the series might be adapted if season 1 is popular?
I think season 2 would be Clash of Kings. Now, it might be Clash is a little longer than Game. Maybe instead of 10 hours, we'd be budgeted for 12 hours, but that's HBO's decision and the decision of David and Dan when we get there. When we get to Storm of Swords, which is significantly longer than either of the first 2 books, then we might need to break it into 2 seasons or to have a considerably longer season. I mean, one thing, if you look at HBO shows, it's not like a network show. I mean, back in the old days, I mean, when I was working on Beauty and the Beast and Twilight Zone, a full season was 22 hours, 22 episodes, which they would inevitably order like the first 13 and the back 9, they would call it. They'd order 13 episodes, you'd make those, and if the show was successful, they'd order 9 more, the back 9, and then you'd be up to 22 episodes. That's broken down. I mean, I'm talking the 1980s then. That's no longer the rule, even in networks, but their seasons do tend to be longer. HBO seasons, if you look at The Sopranos or Rome or any of their seasons, the number of episodes in a season varies from season to season. And I expect that will be true of our show too.
Are you concerned at all that, if the show starts and it's successful, that they'll sort of run out of the material that you've already published, and that, they'll sort of be waiting and then, waiting for book 6 or whatever it is at that time, that, since it's taking you a couple of years to work on a novel, and, conceivably they could be doing a show each year or a season each year.
Yeah, theoretically that's a danger, but I have an enormous head start here. I have a huge lead on them. And I know how long it's taken me for Dance with Dragons and for Feast for Crows before that, but I still cling to the belief, perhaps mistakenly, that they're not always going to be that long. I mean, I have written books faster than this. I'm not always this slow. I think these books have had particular problems that have delayed me. So maybe I will pick up speed again and I'll write the next book, and it will take me 5 years. It'll only take me 2 years, maybe 2.5. That's what I think is about the right time that it should take me to do one of these monsters. I mean, way back in the beginning of the series, and when I first contracted for them, I was estimating I could do it in a book a year, because that's what my earlier novels had taken. That's what Fever Dream had taken, and Dying in the Light, and Armageddon Rag. Each of them took me about a year. But let's face it, these books are 3 times the size of those books. So there's no way I'm going to do a book in 1 year. But 2 years, 2.5 years, I think is about right. And if I can do it that fast, I don't think HBO will ever catch up to me.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in Feast for Crows and Dance with Dragons, there are so many characters and so many subplots going on. It seems like you might run into budget problems with the show. I mean, which has sort of been...
Well, that would be consistent with my history. Everything I ever did always ran into budget problems.
I mean, have you thought at all about whether they might want to streamline the events, and do you have any sort of...
Well, they're gonna have to do a certain amount of that. I mean, we're already doing that with the first season, deciding what will be the speaking parts and what minor characters can be cut, or at least can be reduced to extras. I mean, you can have a character who is still there, but he no longer has any lines. So he's standing in the background, and you can look at him and say, oh, look, the cook is still there, but he no longer has the 3 lines that he has in the book. And that, of course, makes a big difference budget-wise, because instead of casting an actor, you're casting an extra who is considerably cheaper. So that kind of stuff will happen, and events will have to happen, and all of that. That's going to be part of the process. But it's, it's not something you can solve in the abstract 3 years ahead of time. You simply have to do it episode by episode and deal with each issue as it comes up.
Do you find it kind of funny that you've said that you left Hollywood because they were always telling you your projects were too expensive, and you said, well, now I'm going to just go back to novel writing where I can have the massive scope that I want, and then that's the one that they want to try to adapt?
Oh, yeah, I think there's a tremendous irony to it, but one that I sort of appreciate. It's a strange world we live in here. The more things go around, they come around, right? But that's fine. I mean, the issues are, I'm involved in the show, but I'm not the showrunner. So David Benioff and Dan Weiss are on top of this, and they're great fans of the books. They're terrific writers in their own rights, and they're great producers, and they'll have to deal with these problems as they come up, and I wish them every luck. and I'm there to consult with if need be.
So, George R. R. Martin, thanks so much for joining us on Geek's Guide to the Galaxy.
Well, I thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And that was our interview. So thanks so much to George for joining us on the show. And we'll be back to talk more about George and his writing after this word from our sponsor.
New from Brilliance Audio, The Zombies of Lake Wobegotten by Harrison Geeler. The town of Lake Wobegotten, Minnesota is a small town, filled with ordinary, yet above average, people, leading ordinary lives. Ordinary, that is, until the dead start coming back to life, with the intent to feast upon the living. Now this small town of above-average citizens must overcome their petty rivalries and hidden secrets in order to survive the onslaught of the dead. The Zombies of Lake Wobegotten by Harrison Geeler. Narrated by Phil Gigante. Available now from Brilliance Audio and wherever audiobooks are sold.
So just for our regular listeners, we just wanted to give a quick update on kind of the state of the podcast, since we've kind of been on hiatus for about 4 months. So we're back. We're on IO9 now, and we're planning at the moment to do bi-weekly, every other week rather than weekly. The weekly schedule is just insane, and it really created big problems if a guest canceled on us at the last minute. It was really hard to get the next episode out. So hopefully this will be a little bit more civilized.
And so one of the other things we're going to be doing now that we relaunched is we're going to be taking some listener donations. We had a number of listeners who asked if they could support the podcast in that way, and previously we had no way of doing that when we were on tour.com. But here on IO9, it's all cleared to go. And if you want to make a donation, you can just go to PayPal and send some money to geeksgalaxy@gmail.com. And if you do that, we would appreciate it, and you'd be helping support the show. And of course, one of the other ways you can support the show is to, go to iTunes and leave a review there, or, you just come here to IO9 and leave comments, and because that's the way, our corporate masters know that people are listening and enjoying the show. And also, you should buy lots of books from Brilliance Audio.
All right, great. So now let's talk a little bit about George R. R. Martin.
So who is he again?
Well, he's one of my favorite authors. I talked about this in an earlier episode, I think, but the first George R. R. Martin story I ever read was called Sand Kings. I was in an airport one time, and my flight was delayed, and I had nothing to do, and I went into a bookstore and picked up a collection edited by Isaac Asimov called The Super Hugos, and this Hugo-winning short story Sand Kings was in it, and I read it, and man, it just creeped me out so much. And the least likely time that you're going to be scared is when you're bored and sitting in an airport waiting for a flight, surrounded by hundreds of people. And just the fact that story it gave me chills just so much in that situation.
So wait, is this an alternate history story you're telling here? Because I can't believe that there was a science fiction anthology in an airport bookstore.
I'm telling you, man, I don't know how it happened, but there it was. So yeah, and so that was the first thing by George that I read, and then actually when I went to the Odyssey writing workshop, one of our assignments was we were supposed to do a sort of close analysis of our favorite short story, and I picked that one. And there were 18 students or something, and there was somebody else in the class who had picked Sand Kings as his favorite short story too, which I thought was a pretty amazing coincidence. Mm-hmm. It's a science fiction story about alien pets who get out of control. It was funny actually when I did I attended Orson Scott Card's writers boot camp years ago, and a woman was telling a story about fumigating her house and all the problems she was having with bugs in this house, and somebody says, wow, that sounds like a great idea for a science fiction story. And Orson Scott Card says, yeah, it is. Unfortunately, it's already been written. It's called Sand Kings by George R. R. Martin.
I can't remember what the first George R. R. Martin story I read was. It may have actually been Game of Thrones. But, since then, obviously, I've read a lot of his other stuff. But, speaking of Sand Kings, that just reminds me of one of his other horrific stories, which is the story called Meat House Man, which I reprinted in The Living Dead. It's kind of an unusual zombie story in that it's like, it takes place in the far future, and, humanity's, settled other planets throughout the galaxy and all that. And the zombies in the story are actually, they're sort of technologically reanimated corpses. The character is what they call a corpse handler, and it's sort of like they attach this rig to the corpses that allow
a living person to go into this control booth and control a bunch of corpses at the same time, you sort of as slave labor. But then shortly into the story, you learn that not only do they use it for slave labor, but they also use it for sexual gratification. And it's just really, really creepy as the story goes on. I mean, with the the different explorations of that aspect of the story. As a controller of the zombies, it's like, because your brain is sort of connected to the zombie through this device, it has this sort of feedback loop. So when they're having sex with the corpses, it's like the most intense pleasure that they could ever have, because it's like there's a feedback loop going on, and the corpse sort of responds exactly as the person controlling it wants it to because of that feedback loop. So I thought that was really interesting, and it's just really kind of disturbing. But and I mean, there's other things about the story too that are sort of dark and creepy, but I mean, that's one of my favorites of his.
Everyone knows Song of Ice and Fire, but he's just such a great short story writer too, and fortunately most of his stories have recently been released in a series of collections called Dream Songs. Mm-hmm. And I highly recommend people pick those up.
Yeah, and actually I just reprinted a story of his in Lightspeed called And for a Single Yesterday, and that story is not actually in Dream Song, so Lightspeed is probably the easiest place to find it. I mean, it's because it's the only place I found it was in a couple different. There's like an anthology that it originally appeared in called Epoch, but then it was like reprinted in one of George's collections. But both are long out of print. Sort of dug that up out of the history books, and it's really a very fresh story. Reads like a very contemporary story, even though it was written in 1975. So, worth checking out if you want to learn more about George, because you can go read it for free.
Yeah, actually, I made a list here of some of my very favorite George R. R. Martin short stories, so I'll just read these and people can go check them out. A Song for Laia, In the Lost Lands, Sand Kings, Night Flyers, The Monkey Treatment, Unsound Variations, The Hedge Knight, and Portraits of His Children.
Yeah, the Hedge Knight's really good too, and that one's part of the Song of Ice and Fire, set in the same world. So I mean, that's actually a way for people to sort of sample the setting without diving headfirst into one of the novels, like if they're not ready for that level of commitment. It was also adapted into a graphic novel too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, George has a lot of great stories. I mean, Dream Songs is a great collection. I mean, just because it gives you such a comprehensive view of all of his different talents. Maybe I don't think you mentioned Skin Trade. Mm. That's the big werewolf novella that he has in there. I mean, that's a really good one, I think. But yeah, I mean, actually, and if you like audiobooks, as you might listening to a podcast, the Dream Songs audiobook is actually pretty awesome. Because it's broken up into 3 volumes, which is a little lame, but it's broken up into 3 volumes, and so they're able to include almost all of the stories in the book. Because whereas most anthologies or collections on audio, they just abridge it and they just leave half the stories out. But with the Dream Songs one, even though it's a mammoth 2-volume collection in book form, they've included almost all the stories in the audiobook, and most of them are very, very well narrated. There's a couple narrators in there that I didn't like, but actually, because the guy who narrates the Song of Ice and Fire audiobooks, I really dislike, and he read some of the books in the collection as well. But generally, they're very good. The guy who reads Hedge Knight is very good, as I recall, and some of the others are excellent as well.
But no, yeah. So actually, when I was at the Odyssey workshop, this guy who also listed Sand Kings as his favorite short story, this guy Danny, he told me I had to read Song of Ice and Fire. Mm. And at the time, I was really kind of down on epic fantasy. I'd basically given up on epic fantasy. I think I just, read one too many bad Dragonlance novels, and I was just kind of like, I'm done with this. And so it really took a lot to get me to pick up Game of Thrones in the first place. I had to have actually a couple people, really recommend it to me before and it's such a, it's such a huge book that, it really takes a lot to get me to read a big, thick novel like that.
And each one's longer than the last almost, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's you're like, oh my god! I mean, the first one's long enough, and then oh my god, look at this! Look at the next ones.
But yeah, so I read Game of Thrones, and just man, from the opening prelude chapter, I was just like, wow, this is great. One of the things about that series that really strikes me is just how strongly I feel about the characters. I mean, like there's a character named Joffrey, and I just hate him so much. I mean, just on a really visceral level, I just hate him. And I mean, just the fact that a book just can make you just feel such intense emotions about the characters, I think is really, really cool. Mm-hmm. Especially in some of the later books. We're going to try to keep this as spoiler free as possible, just so you know. But in some of the later books, there are just some shocking events that happen, and I was just so devastated, when some of these things happened. I mean, sort of put the book down, and I was like, wow, I don't know if I can keep reading. I'm just so devastated by what's happened. And
yeah, that's so rare to happen in any sort of entertainment. I mean, I guess in movies, like, it's easier to get caught up in the moment sometimes because they have music and you have visuals and all this stuff sort of conspiring against your emotions to cause you to weep or something. But in a book, I think it's really hard and very rare in fantasy to have such affecting characters that would cause you to get that upset. So I mean, I think it's really one of the things he does very well. It also helps that he's so brutal when it comes. It's like the reality is it's a very brutal reality that these characters live in. I mean, it's like nobody's safe in most epic fantasy. I mean, you have your heroes, and all those heroes are basically going to survive all the way into the end of the series. And in Martin, it's just like that's not this case at all. I mean, like nobody's safe. I mean, it's like you never know when some major character is going to end up getting killed off or something. So. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting just because, it feels very like, oh, well, okay, yeah, this is like high stakes here. It's funny, though, like hearing you describe how you ended up reading Song of Ice and Fire, because it's almost the same exact situation as I was in. I had also read a bunch of epic fantasy, and I sort of burned out on it. It was just sort of a confluence of friends recommending the books to me and saying, oh, my God, they're so awesome. And it's just like, would you guys shut up? Okay, I'll read it. Just shut up already. So I did, and then it was like, oh, okay, well, now I know why you guys wouldn't shut up about this. But yeah, no, it took a lot of convincing for me to try it. I mean, if I had been more familiar with his work previously, I mean, I probably would have been inclined to just go ahead and try it. But, I wasn't familiar with him before. I mean, except like I'd heard of him, but I hadn't really read him. And so it took a lot of convincing for me to try it, but I'm glad everybody convinced me to.
Yeah, and I was certainly one of those friends.
Yeah, oh yeah, God. Oh man, like, to hear Dave and our friend Doug and our friend Andrea just like talk about Song of Ice and Fire, you'd think that they were talking about real people and real events that happened to them in their own lives. I mean, I would have to leave the room because they would be talking about all these spoilers and stuff, and it's like, I don't want to hear anything, it's like, I'm going to read these things, I want to go into it fresh. Just to see how excited they got about it, it was like, part of the reason that convinced me to read it. I mean, I could kind of see the same thing in all of us when we were like watching Battlestar Galactica, and it was leading up to the finale, and we were all sort of like talking about, oh well, what could happen, and then I have this theory about this or that, and then of course that ultimately disappointed us all and made us want to boycott anything else Ron Moore ever does. But we're hoping that George will not dull us down, and I don't have any reason to expect he would. But I didn't expect that from Ron Moore either. But I believe in George, so.
But I mean, there must be at least like 25 people I can think of that I've personally convinced to read that have read the books because face to face I told them to read it. There was actually a point where the publisher put out really cheap copies of Game of Thrones, really inexpensive copies, like I think it was value priced at $3 or something, and I just bought I think 5 and just gave them out to people. Like, you have to read this. I sort of got my whole extended family to read them as well. Even people who don't normally read, fantasy novels, would just get really, really into these books. So
part of the reason that the series appeals to so many different kinds of people is that it largely reads like a history of some alternate world, not Earth, that just, where society and stuff just develops sort of differently. Because the magic is so low, there's such a low level of magic, and it's so in the background for most of the series, non-fantasy readers can really get drawn into that. I mean, I think the thing that puts off a lot of sort of mainstream readers or whatever from fantasy is that the magic and stuff is too much for them. But then I think George Martin has sort of just the right amount to keep it at a level that it makes it very accessible, yet is also, totally satisfying to the people who actually crave that stuff.
There was a time, actually, I had convinced, we were at a bookstore, I don't remember who I was with, and I had convinced someone to buy Game of Thrones, and we were making our way toward the cash register, and 2 or 3 people, just strangers, just exclaimed, "Oh, that's a great book!" Just seeing it, in my friend's hands, and I've never seen anything like that. It was amazing. One thing about epic fantasy series that can be a challenge too is a lot of times there's so many characters to keep track of. Mm-hmm. I'll ask. I came across a list online one time of every named character in Song of Ice and Fire. And then there's other unnamed characters, like extras and stuff. But so I'll ask people, who've read this series, how many named characters do you think there are in those it was in the 4 books that are out, and people usually guess like, I don't know, 75 or 100 or something. Mm-hmm. And there were actually over 1,000
wow
names on this list.
Huh.
I mean, when people complain about how long it's taking to write these books, I mean, just think of how long it would take you to sit down and write 1,000, make up 1,000 fantasy names. You know, just that, not even the story or anything, just to come up with all those names. I mean,
right.
I mean, it's just a huge scale. And so actually, you know, so it's you know, sometimes not easy to keep track of what's going on because it's so complex. And so actually there's a sort of fan artist named Amoka, Amoka, or at least that's his handle. And he did fan art for tons and tons of the characters for, I didn't count, I would say maybe 70 or 80 characters, you know, he did portraits of. And you can go online and find them. I guess we'll have a link in the show notes. And I found that really, really helpful for especially keeping track of some of the more peripheral, you know, sort of secondary characters. That's actually something I first noticed when I would read Roger Zelazny's Chronicles of Amber as a kid. I would sometimes have trouble keeping all the characters straight. And then I got the role-playing game, and they had portraits of all the characters, and I found that so helpful just to have a picture to associate with the name. And you know how fantasy novels, they always have like maps and stuff, you know, at the beginning. I've always thought it would be kind of cool if they would just have portraits of all the major characters.
For Song of Ice and Fire, you'd need a whole separate book for that.
But so that's, I mean, so it's cool to have those pictures of the characters. And it's also really helpful to have pictures of some of the environments and things in the series. There's actually this calendar that just came out. It's called the Song of Ice and Fire 2011 calendar, illustrated by Ted Nasmith. They have a portrait for each month of one of the fortresses from the series. So, like when I was reading, I always wanted a picture of what the area looks like, the sort of fortress on top of a really high up mountain. Mm-hmm. And so it's and George actually, you know, consulted on this, so like all the pictures of everything matches, you know, his visions of it. And he actually consulted with these fan portraits too. He actually went through them at one point and kind of gave notes, and the guy changed some of them to make them conform more to what George was saying.
There actually is a Song of Ice and Fire role-playing game too, isn't there?
Yeah, I think there.
Or is it just some sort of board game?
No, there's I've played the board game. The board game is actually a lot of fun. There's a role-playing game. I mean, there were. I haven't looked at it in detail. I mean, they brought out one, and then the company folded, I think, and a company called Green Ronin did one. I'm not sure if that's the newest one, but yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of secondary, you know, materials. There's actually a really good art book. I think it's called The Art of Ice and Fire, where it's just collections of the best art that's been done for, you know, the card games and the calendars and things. You know, there's an artist named Michael Komark who's just done some really amazing Ice and Fire illustrations. The cover, it's a picture of Jaime Lannister sitting on the Iron Throne. But actually, you know, I was thinking that kids today, they grow up reading Harry Potter, and like everyone's reading Harry Potter, and they're all waiting for the next book. And there was nothing really like that when I was growing up. I mean, all the series I was reading were done already by the time I found out about them. And then I didn't know anyone else really who was reading the same stuff I was, and there was no internet. And so, like, Song of Ice and Fire has really been, like, the one thing I've had, kind of like that, where it's been a series that, you know, I sort of caught before it was finished and have sort of been involved in discussions online and things. And there's just a really active online community discussing Ice and Fire. If anyone's a fan of the series, you should, and you're interested in, there's some great message boards about it and things. But so it's kind of been interesting, just sort of from a sociology standpoint almost, to see that kind of thing in action. And, you know, because when you just read the books, you sort of pay an equal amount of attention pretty much to every chapter as you're reading it. But then when people are trying to figure out what's going to happen next, they fixate amazingly on particular moments that seem to provide clues. And so, I mean, like, I read the first 3 books the first time through, and there's a section in Game of Thrones where Ned Stark thinks about something from his past that happens at a place called the Tower of Joy. And, you know, I barely remembered that from my first read. And there's a place where in Clash of Kings where Daenerys Targaryen goes to a place called the House of the Undying, where she sees kind of like prophecies about the future. So just reading the series, you know, these things sort of just register. But when people are talking about the books, you know, these chapters just get talked about over and over and over and over again, to the point where, you know, you practically have the whole thing memorized and people know every single line, and, you know, you've just read dozens of threads about what does this sentence suggest. And it's just funny to see how completely differently people read when they're sort of working as a community trying to solve the mystery. There are all these mysteries in the series, and, you know, people have all sorts of theories about how to resolve them. And it's funny that if you're familiar with all these theories and you've been following it for years, then someone will join the message board for the first time and they'll say, this may sound crazy, but I have this theory about who Jon Snow's mother might be, and everyone's like, oh yeah, come on, here's look at the FAQ. It's topic number 1,
What you were saying about this being the first time you've run into a series that wasn't finished and, you're waiting for the book. That just makes me think of how some fans are so vicious towards Martin because it's taken so long for him to finish, the next volume. But, there's all these fans that leave really nasty comments on his blog whenever he talks about anything but Song of Ice and Fire. They're just like, finish the book, George. And it's like, it got to the point where people thought it was so ridiculous that Neil Gaiman actually came out and had a post that said George Martin is not your bitch. He has a life, leave him alone. Harping at him to finish the book is not going to help. So I just think it's interesting how what a fervor people get whipped into, over waiting for the book. And it's like, even though they love him, they love him like nothing else, but yet they can still muster up this hatred for him because he hasn't finished the book yet. It's kind of an interesting pathology that you love something so much and then treat it with such disdain at the same time.
Well, no, I mean, and Feast for Crows just covered half the characters, so there are some big mysteries from the end of Storm of Swords that still haven't been resolved. And I mean, I read Storm of Swords I think in 2003. So, I mean, it's like 7 years. I think it came out in 2001. So, I mean, some people have been waiting 9 years, to find out how these things, what's going to happen. And, I mean, I'm certainly, I certainly want to find out as much as anyone does and would love to see the book. But, I mean, I think as a writer, I just have so much sympathy for George. I mean, just knowing how hard it is, for me, I write, and I've never even written a novel. I write short stories and just, how much, just an incredible amount of effort I put into writing, a 7,000-word story. And then to think about writing, a book, like 20 or 30 times that long. I mean, I certainly have immense sympathy for anyone who undertakes a project like that.
I predict that someone will post in the comments to this podcast that finish the book, George. There's at least one of those. They won't even listen to the episode because they're so furious at the thought he took time to talk to this stupid podcast. If you're writing Song of Ice and Fire. While everyone's waiting for the next book, I thought we might want to discuss a bit, what other books people might like if they like Song of Ice and Fire. Because, since the books have come out, I think there's been a lot of new epic fantasy that's been influenced by it. And then, the first person I sort of thought of was Scott Lynch, who wrote this great book called The Lives of Locke Lamora, and he's written a couple sequels since then. Because I've read it and I thought it was great, and it's obviously influenced by Martin. I mean, that's one of the reasons I thought of it. But the other reason is I was at Worldcon one year, and George Martin was there, and I saw him and Scott Lynch I was at a George Martin party. There's this fan group called Brotherhood Without Banners, and they throw parties at a lot of different cons. And so there was Scott Lynch, George was sitting in a chair, and Scott Lynch was sitting on the floor, sort of looking up at him, and it was like, oh, look at this! It's like the student sitting at the feet of the master, just learning. And so I just thought that was interesting because it's like, it's like you just knew that he was influenced by him by reading the book, but then you see that and it's like, oh, okay, well, there you go.
Yeah, no, it is kind of funny that the Song of Ice and Fire has been going on so long that you actually, people have grown up and, had careers in the time that people have been waiting between books. But yeah, I mean, I definitely second the recommendation of Scott Lynch's Lives of Locke Lamora. That's a tremendously well done book. I would say also, Roger Zelazny's Chronicles of Amber.
Well, that's a precursor, though.
Oh, are we only? I thought we were.
No, that's fine. I'm just saying it's worth mentioning. It's a precursor, not
Yeah, it's a precursor certainly, and I would argue it's an influence as well. Another thing along those lines is Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun. I just reread Book of the New Sun, and there are actually tons of parallels between it.
Really?
And Song of Ice and Fire. Yeah, I mean, I've always thought that the Seekers After Truth and Penitence, was really similar to the Night's Watch. They wear black and they have these, they've existed for a long time, so they've kind of fallen on hard times, and they have all these rituals they don't really understand anymore. And, if you think about Jon Snow versus Severian, I mean, one of the big mysteries of Book of the New Sun is figuring out who everyone in Severian's family tree is, and it's kind of a similar thing with Jon Snow. And there's a huge wall around the city of Nessus that's called the Wall, and there's the big wall in the north. And another one I just noticed actually was that, in Castle Black, there's a guy named Maester Aemon who's blind, and in the Mattachine Tower in Book of the New Sun, there's a character named Master Palamon who's blind. Just stuff like that.
Right. Okay. It's worth pointing out that it's called Book of the New Sun, but it's actually 4 books. So I mean, it's like a series as well, and you kind of have to read the whole thing. not really like something that you would read the first one and then just stop. And you really have to read the whole thing. But yeah, it's pretty amazing. Sort of the books that we mentioned. I mean, a few come to mind that I haven't read, but I've heard that are, good, that are sort of along the lines of Martin, like Joe Abercrombie, his epic fantasy books that are out now, and Brian Ruckley specifically. Like, I'd heard these people are sort of disciples of George Martin. And, I think, you just read Swords and Dark Magic, right? The anthology?
Yeah.
So, would you recommend that for Martin fans, or?
Well, I just started it.
Oh, okay.
But I'm loving it so far. This is an anthology edited by Jonathan Strahan and Lou Anders, and it's called Swords and Dark Magic: The New Sword and Sorcery. Yeah, and it has Scott Lynch and Joe Abercrombie. I read both those stories, loved them, and there's a bunch of other stories I haven't gotten to yet. But it's got Gene Wolfe, Glenn Cook, Ursula Le Guin. I mean, it's just a great lineup of authors who are writing great kind of sword and sorcery stuff right now. And there's been sort of a resurgence of sword and sorcery in the last 8 or 10 years or so. I would say largely as a result of the success of Song of Ice and Fire.
Yeah, actually, speaking of Glenn Cook, I mean, he's an excellent author, I think, to recommend as well. I mean, between the Black Company series and the Dread Empire series, I mean, I think fans of Martin would also enjoy his work.
And since Feast for Crows was so long delayed, it gave me plenty of time to reread the first 3 books. I read them, I read each of them 5 times while I was waiting for Feast for Crows to come out. And it is, I mean, they are books that reward rereading. I mean, you read them and you just keep noticing connections and things. It's really amazing. There's a line at one point about how Robert Baratheon had fathered a bastard child when he was a young man living in the Vale of Arryn. And later, Catelyn Stark travels there, and she gets led up a mountain by a young woman named Maya Stone, who's a bastard given her last name, and she has like this black hair that's characteristic of all of Robert Baratheon's bastard children. And so you're like, oh, hey, that's, and the first time I never noticed that, but, in subsequent rereadings, all of a sudden you're like, oh, hey, that's her. And, when Arya is sort of training, sort of sword training with Syrio Forel, he sends her around the Red Keep to catch cats. And there's this big, nasty cat she can never catch. Then at one point you hear this story about how the Princess Rhaenys had a kitten that disappeared during a storming of the castle. And you're like, oh, oh, it's the same cat. The cat is still around. And I mean, the most clever, this is kind of a spoiler, so I'll be circumspect about how I phrase it, but the character Thoros of Myr has a special ability, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and he doesn't know why. And it actually is possible to figure out the pattern behind why it works sometimes and why it doesn't. And when you figure that out, you're like, oh, wow, that is pretty clever. And it's all right there. I mean, it's like, oh, of course.
It's very cool, though, that he does stuff like that, but doesn't actually just spell it out for you. Like, like sort of leaves it there for you to figure out if, because it's not like relevant necessarily, I guess, but he doesn't like hit you over the head with it. It's like, oh, here, look how clever I was. This is how it works. Because I think most writers would be unable to resist the urge to do that.
And there are like a lot of in-jokes too. Just like there's a part in Game of Thrones where where Catelyn Stark is taking Tyrion Lannister to the Eyrie, and there are just sort of random mercenaries hanging around, and 3 of them are named Larys, Mohor, and Curlicat. So I saw actually someone asked George, like, these are like the 3 Stooges, right? And he's like, yeah, I didn't think anyone would notice that. And then there's just like references to authors he likes too. Like there's one of the houses is Vance, which he mentioned Jack Vance. And if you look through the index, I mean some of them they only appear in the index and on the maps and stuff. But like there's a house Rogers of Amberley, which is reference to Roger Zelazny's Amber series. And there's a house Jourdain of the Tor, and it's Robert Jordan, and Tor publishes his stories and stuff like that. So there's like little things like that the more times you reread it, you keep noticing these things. I think another thing that's really interesting, if you've read George's other work, his earlier novels and short stories and things, and then you read Song of Ice and Fire, is you can sort of see how Song of Ice and Fire is like his magnum opus, where he's taken pretty much every character and every idea that he ever came up with previously and sort of put them all into the same milieu. Like Sandor Clegane has his half-burned face, and there's a guy like that in George's first novel, Dying of the Light. And if you read the Tough Voyaging, Haviland Tough kind of has this dry sense of humor, and he has a sort of a friend named Jaime, and their relationship is exactly like the relationship dynamic of Tyrion Lannister and Jaime Lannister. and the whites are like these sort of zombies who are being controlled presumably by some distant intelligence, and that's kind of like the the zombie workers that you mentioned from Meat House Man and the stories in that sequence. And names will reappear too. Like I mentioned this story, A Song for Laia, and there's like a character named Rob with 2 B's in that.
Speaking of the similarities like that, George sure seems to like calling things songs, right? I mean, he's got Song of Ice and Fire, it's Dream Songs. He's got A Song for Laia. The tribute anthology to Jack Vance was Songs of Dying Earth. He's got another one coming out that's got songs in it. Oh, I think it's called Songs of Love and Death.
Well, I think at this point probably it's as much a marketing thing as anything else. Like for Songs of Love and Death, I'm sure the publisher was like, maybe we could just rename this to make it sound more like Song of Ice and Fire,
Yeah, because it actually was called something else.
Yeah, it's called Star-Crossed Lovers, I think.
Oh yeah,
originally.
right.
But yeah, here's from Wikipedia. They say one of Martin's earliest attempts at writing a fantasy story was Dark Gods of Kor Yubin, which was never published. The 2 heroes of the short story are the exiled Prince R'hllor of Raug and his boisterous, swaggering companion Argilac the Arrogant. In an abandoned sequel, Argilac teams up with Baron, the bloody blade of the Dothrak Empire, to slay the winged demons who killed Baron's grandfather Barristan the Bold. So, like, if you're a fan of Song of Ice and Fire, you recognize all those names, have reappeared in Song of Ice and Fire. George is very adamant to new writers, to not throw out anything at all that you write, even if you don't think it's any good, because, there's probably something in there that you can reuse for something else at some point. Actually, probably the biggest one is, if you've read the Armageddon Rag, there's a line in there. I won't say what it is, but I feel it's a huge thematic spoiler for Song of Ice and Fire.
Oh, really? Huh?
So if you're dying to, if you can't wait for Dance with Dragons and you want a clue, I recommend Armageddon Rag.
I didn't realize Martin had done all that with Song of Ice and Fire, where he pulled in all this stuff from his other works, the way you describe. But I mean, when you describe that, and especially since you called it his magnum opus, I mean, it just kind of makes me think of The Dark Tower by Stephen King, because people often refer to that as his magnum opus. And I mean, he did that same exact thing, except even more literally. I mean, he like literally connects the worlds of his stories all to the same story in The Dark Tower, where like The Dark Tower is sort of like the spine, and all of his other stories are sort of these peripheral parts of the body, and that they're all connected. And in many cases, like it just takes the character right out of a story, and puts it into The Dark Towers. Yeah, so I mean that's interesting that Martin does it in sort of a more subtle way.
Yeah, and I think, that's one reason why I think people should read short stories, because a lot of times ideas originate in short stories. And, if you're not reading any of the short stories, you're sort of missing out on, where a lot of the stuff came from and what its initial form was. So it's sort of the same thing with Philip K. Dick. If you've read any Philip K. Dick novels and you've also read his short stories, a lot of his novels, he just literally took 3 short stories and sort of shoved them all together, and that's a novel. Yeah, one thing, that sort of has always struck me reading the message board is that there was this thread one time where there was sort of a poll on who were the sexiest characters, in Song of Ice and Fire.
Mm-hmm.
But the 3 male characters who were rated the sexiest were Jaime Lannister, Sandor Clegane, and Theon Greyjoy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there's some, if you've read the books, these are sort of like, not quite, but pretty close to the 3 biggest jerks. In the series.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a whole bad boy appeal going on there, I guess.
Jaime specifically is often referred to as being very handsome, though, isn't he? I mean, that one seemed kind of obvious to me.
Yeah, but Sandor Clegane has like half his face.
Yeah, right.
That's
a little puzzling.
I wonder if that's the kind of thing where like it makes a difference that you can't actually see it.
Right. Well, yeah, because I think it would probably look pretty horrible, just especially with no modern science to even tidy it up a bit, with skin grafts and whatnot.
When I guess, I don't know, if they'll probably have a similar poll when the HBO series comes out. It would be interesting to see how that would differ from, what people think just based on the descriptions in the books.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the casting for the HBO series, I guess George talked about it a little bit. They have, Sean Bean as Ned Stark is probably the most recognizable. They have Lena Headey, who's the Sarah Connor Chronicles. She plays Sarah Connor. She's Cersei Lannister. HBO just a couple days ago released this promo piece where you can see some of the actors in costume for the first time. So if you haven't watched that and you're interested, you should check that out. They have also Peter Dinklage as Tyrion Lannister, and what's the guy's name? The guy playing Khal Drogo is he's like from Stargate Atlantis or something like that.
Mm. Oh, and actually, I didn't realize this, but what's his name? Littlefinger or?
Yeah, Peter Baelish.
Yeah, so he's played by the guy who plays Mayor Carcetti in The Wire, for anybody who watches The Wire.
It was making me a little nervous, though, watching that promo piece, because I mean, it looks like they're doing a really good job, but, it isn't exactly how I picture the characters. And George describes the world in such sumptuous, grand ways that I just don't know if a TV production, even, an HBO one, can possibly match the sort of rich colors that the world has in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that, I guess we're just about out of time. We kind of like to end things with a quote. So I had a quote I was going to read that I really like. This is from, I guess this is from the introduction to Dream Songs. But this is a quote by Gardner Dozois. He's a well-known editor in the field and, has known George for a long time. And this is his description of George Martin's writing. He says, "George has always been a richly romantic writer. Dry minimalism or the coolly ironic games of postmodernism so beloved by so many modern writers and critics are not what you're going to get when you open something by George R. R. Martin. What you're going to get instead is a strongly plotted story driven by emotional conflict and crafted by someone who's a natural-born storyteller, a story that grabs you on the first page and refuses to let go. You're going to get adventure, action, conflict, romance, and lust, vivid human emotion, obsessive doomed love, stark undying hatred, unexpected veins of rich humor. It's something that's rare even in science fiction and fantasy these days, let alone in the mainstream. A love of adventure for adventure's sake, a delighting in the strange and colorful, bizarre plants and animals, exotic scenery, strange lands, strange customs, stranger people, backed by the inexhaustible desire to see what's over the next hill or waiting on the next world."
All right, well, thanks everyone for joining us. It's great to be back, and we hope you'll tune into the next episode.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of IO9 and is brought to you by Brilliance Audio. For this episode's show notes, to subscribe to this podcast, or for more information about the show, visit io9.com/tag/geeksguide. To learn more about your hosts, visit johnjosephadams.com or davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by Slipgate 9 Entertainment. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.